My town has a secret. A big one. It's not something we talk about much to outsiders, and I'm only emailing you this confession because you promised you wouldn't share my name or location. All the names I'm giving you are not the real names of the people in my town. We don't want any trouble. You see, my town has a problem. A dogman problem. You used the word infested. That's a good word. My town is infested with dogmen. I'll give you one piece of information. I do not live in Mississippi. You have 49 other states to choose from. Everyone here knows the rules. You don't go into the forest alone, and at night, you stay out of the forest altogether. You keep your pets inside once the sun goes down. You don't go investigating any weird noises outside, and never shoot one of them, because it just makes them mad. Everyone here knows that, especially in the late summer and early fall months, is when they're most active. Some people I know here call it monster season. I call it Dogman September. Yeah, the infestation is that bad. A little bit about me before we get into it. I moved here when I was 20 years old. I was pregnant, scared, and out of options. My boyfriend and I rented a house from a relative of his. We lived about 2 hours away from there at the time. We both started working at restaurants to help save money and prepare for the baby. The house was small, but it worked. It had a room for us and one for the kid. We put every last penny we could into fixing that place up and turning it into our home. Eventually, she was born. Ella, my little princess. James and I both got better jobs, and eventually we were able to buy the house from the relative. Our loan was pretty fierce, though. Maybe we were a little hasty in settling for this house, and this town. I guess it's too late for that now. I remember the first time I heard a story about the dogman. It was from one of our close neighbors. He came by and told us he saw a big wolf in the woods while he was hunting. I think it was one of them, he said. I was confused. I had no idea what he was talking about. I just assumed he meant some random species of wolf, until he elaborated. He told us both that another townie lost his dog a few nights ago. A big lab. He was all torn up. I asked if the wolves around here were afraid of people, but he just laughed at me. He told us that the wolves around here, and he used finger quotations during that part, are not like normal wolves at all. He told us they could walk around on 2 legs. My turn to laugh. He looked at me like I just called him a liar, and told me to listen to the stories of the rest of the people that have been here a while. I just smiled and said I would, even though I had no intentions of doing so. I was a blimp. Irritable. I had to pee all the time. Why would I ask a bunch of strangers to tell me flights of fancy about wolves walking around on 2 legs? I mean, what are we talking about here? Werewolves? I think not. Soon after that, though, I made my first friend. Nancy. A stay-at-home mom to 3 little children. I was definitely grateful to meet her, and to talk to her about childbirth and raising a baby. My mom had split when I was a kid, and I didn't really have any other positive female role models to talk to. One day, Nancy and her kids and I were having lunch at my house, and I asked her about the wolves. She got really quiet and looked down. "Did you see one of them?" she asked me. Just the way she reacted and the tone of her voice sent chills down my spine, which of course made me have to pee. So I went to the bathroom, stared at myself in the mirror for a moment, and asked myself if I really wanted to hear what she had to say about this special species of wolf. But I admit curiosity got the better of me. I came back and sat down. Nancy was staring at me. I told her about what Richard had said, and she nodded. She told me he's seen them a lot. I told her to be straight with me. This is what she told me in a nutshell. There are creatures out in the forest that look like wolves, but really aren't. They look just like werewolves. She was sure that they were something different, though. She didn't think they turned into these things when the moon was full, and she didn't think they were sometimes people. She said they were enormous, strong, fast, smart, even smart enough to know what a doorknob is. Most of the time they stay in the forest or the fields and the back roads, but sometimes they come into town late at night when there aren't many people out. Nancy's mom saw one looking in her window one night when she got up to get some water. I guess it snarled at her and took off. The only thing is, the window that this thing was looking in was about 6 feet off the ground. Nancy said she's seen one on one of our roads twice, both times around 11 p.m. The first time it was sniffing around the side of the road and was on all fours. When her headlights hit it, it looked up at her and walked back into the forest. She said the scariest part was the size and how unafraid that thing seemed. The second time she saw it, though, it was on 2 legs and ran across the road right in front of her. She said it was fast as hell and only took 2 or 3 steps to clear the entire road. She said it was probably 7 or 8 feet tall and as muscular as an Olympic weightlifter. It had a tail and big pointed ears, but she couldn't see the whole face this time, just the side of it. Apparently after that, she requested to have her shift switched to days, and when they said no, she put in her notice. After that is when she just stayed at home with her kids. As she was telling me this, my eyes teared up because I was so creeped out. I didn't even know what to believe. I mean, how could any of this even be possible? How could something like this exist without the public knowing? Or a zoologist, or the FBI? I asked her if she was pulling my leg, but she shook her head no. She swore on her own life that she was telling me the truth. As time went on, I learned more and more about these encounters. And the more and more people I met, I found out the more people had seen them. A woman named Marianne heard something large attacking her cat but was too afraid to go out and look at what was going on. She told me about the death cries her cat was making and the snarls she heard from whatever was killing him. The next morning she went to look for her cat, but all she found was some blood. A man named Matt also lost his pet, a Rottweiler mix that he called Montana. He found the carcass of Montana at the edge of his property. He'd been chewed up and half eaten. Another man named Eric and his wife Kate had several run-ins with these things. They live closer to the woods than I do, so I guess that's why. Once they heard something large moving around their patio. They didn't look, but described the noises as heavy footsteps and these deep growling, breathing noises. They caught an odor that night too, and said it smelled like old, dirty animal fur. They also heard something equally as heavy walking around on their rooftop one night. They called the police, but by the time they arrived, whatever it was gone. They were both in the car when they saw the Dogman for the first time. They were on their way home from a faculty meeting one time too, around 7 p.m. The sun was already low, but it was still light enough outside to see clearly. They saw this thing running across the road right in front of them with what looked like a dead raccoon in one of its hands. They described it clearly to me. It was no less than 7 feet tall, muscular but slim, covered in brown hair, but at the shoulders and back had a darker shade of brown, like a mane. It had a long tail, long arms that moved back and forth while it ran, and strong muscular legs. They described the legs just like we had talked about, digitigrade, so walking on its toes. It was upright like a man, but kind of slouched over when it ran. They said it looked perfectly in its element, being on 2 legs, though. The head was enormous, wolf-like with a long snout and big ears. They said it looked remarkably like the werewolf from Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. They got home, ran inside, locked the doors, and stayed up with their guns all night long. It's been years since they've had that encounter, and he still gets eerie and sick to his stomach when he has to drive down that road at night. They're both certain that it was the same type of creature that they heard on their property. Another woman named Erin heard footsteps on her roof. She said they sounded heavy. Then she heard a loud howl, the sound of something landing on the ground, grunting, and then heavy footfalls running through her grass. She called the cops, but they found nothing. A brother and a sister who are friends of mine, Elijah and Marissa, saw a dogman that chased their car when they were teenagers. It took place about 5 years prior to me hearing the story. They were driving down a road, out of the forest, and it came out of nowhere through the trees and ran after them for about half a mile. He said it was doing 50 miles an hour, and it was keeping up with them, running behind the car. Not going 50 miles an hour itself, just able to keep up with stamina, chasing this car for such a long distance. This one was gray, on all fours and powerful looking. They said as it ran, it was snapping at their car until it lost the distance. Even though it wasn't close enough to actually bite it, it was still trying to get to the car. They felt like it was telling them that they were in the wrong place and they needed to leave. Several other people that I know confess to seeing the dogman run across the roads around here, but not all of them have given me the same description. Sometimes the dogman is muscular and sleek, and other times it looks like a giant. There's also different pelt colors too. I've heard dark brown, light brown, black, tan, gray. This definitely proves to me that there's more than one of these things lurking about. I think they're getting more ballsy too. By that I mean, I think they're coming out more so in the daytime. Last summer, I lost 2 different dogs in the middle of the day. Sure, you can say they got out and just ran off, but around here, that's nobody's first reaction. Pets go missing around here all the damn time. The first dog I lost was Arrow. He was a border collie. I just left him in the fenced-in area of our backyard to run to the store with Ella. I thought it would be okay since it was 1 p.m., middle of the day, not a cloud in the sky. When I got back, Arrow was gone. We looked everywhere for him and put up signs, but we never saw him again. Another thing about my town, because of the amount of missing pets here, most people are extremely helpful in getting lost pets reunited with their owners. So if Arrow was around somewhere in town and someone saw him, they most definitely would have called us, since our number was on his tag, and he has a registered microchip. After we lost Arrow, we got another dog, a pit bull mix. His name was Flash. Are you sensing a theme here with my husband? Laugh out loud. Well, Flash didn't last long at all. He went missing too. Again, we never even found a trace of him. This isn't uncommon. This thing happens around here, unfortunately. After Flash went missing, we kind of just gave up on having a dog. I'd feel too bad if another one went missing. A man named Paul and his son Ryan were hunting one weekend and encountered the dogman too. Paul said that the first thing they noticed was a weird silence of the forest around them. Nothing was making a sound. Not a bird, not the bugs, nothing. Then they got hit with that nasty, dirty smell so many of us had been accustomed to now. He used a word to describe it that I've always kept in the back of my head. Repulsive. When they finally saw the dogman, it came out on all fours and slowly started approaching them, mouth open, tongue hanging out. He said he fired at the dogman, even though all of us knew by now that you weren't supposed to. But he said he knew he hit it. He could hear the noise. But it didn't do anything to this thing. The dogman just growled at them and stood up. Paul said his only priority then and there was to get his son out of the forest and back into town. It didn't follow them, but it did stand its ground. Paul said it puffed up its chest and roared at them so loud that he was afraid his ears would blow out. They backed out of the area, gun still drawn on the dogman. They didn't turn around until they were almost to their truck. And Paul said the dogman stared at them the whole time and never broke eye contact. About a month after Ella's first birthday, we had an encounter of our own. The first of several, actually. We were lying in bed, but still awake at this point, and we heard this loud bang. We both popped up and listened. Then we heard more banging. I immediately ran to Ella's room and scooped her up. Luckily, she was still asleep. The 3 of us were in the master bedroom, and we heard more banging. It sounded like it was coming from our shed in the backyard, like someone was rummaging through it. That shed is about 40 feet from our bedroom window, so this was happening pretty close. It went on for about 10 minutes. James wanted to go out with his gun and see what was going on, but I begged him not to. At this point, I think I was already a believer about all the crazy shit that happens here. He eventually came to my way of thinking too. Maybe it was hearing that bark that thing in the shed made. It sounded almost like a human-like bark, but angry and wild. It's actually kind of hard to describe. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We just stayed up listening for it to come back, but it never did. We went to the shed in the morning to have a look around, but only after 3 of our friends came over to go in there with us. We found it in shambles. Boxes were knocked over, the lawn equipment was scattered around, the shovel handle was broken in half. The thing that really got me, though, was that smell. It smelled like a wild animal, like stale blood and dirty fur and musk. It was repulsive. At this point, I now refused to be anywhere at night, under any circumstances. I didn't care. I wasn't going anywhere. We had an alarm put in too, just to be safe. I don't know if it would stop a monster that was breaking in, but I had hopes that the noise of the alarm would drive it off at least. I remember taking a vacation shortly after this, visiting my grandma. We stayed with her for a week, and it felt so refreshing to be away from all the craziness of our town. I still had trouble being outside at night though, but I at least got to enjoy a few nights out there. But it was just a temporary thing, and we had to go back. Nothing really happened for a few months after that, and that was also a huge relief. But then the animals started coming up missing again. A few dogs, several cats. There was a horse that was found with a wound on its rear end that resembled claws. And then a woman named Danielle heard something loud moving around on her porch one night, and this thing actually jiggling the handle of her front door. Can you believe that? They know what doorknobs are for. Danielle called the police and they came out, investigating a potential home invasion, but they didn't find anything. She was unnerved enough, though, to start staying at her boyfriend's house, and ended up staying there for a few weeks. Throughout that year, as the activity started up again and Dogman September came to pass, there were more encounters. A man named Bobby crashed his car into a tree because he saw one cross the road and tried to swerve. He came out of it without any serious injuries, but he swears what he saw was the absolute truth. He passed field sobriety tests, but just kept talking about seeing a werewolf. Another guy named Wade had his second-story bedroom window opened and smelled that same nasty funk that we did. He didn't see or hear anything, but he described the smell as rotted meat and dog piss. Our second encounter with one of these things came when we heard these unearthly howls late one night. It was so loud we could hear them plain as day through our shut windows. You sent me a link to a clip of the howl from an American werewolf in London. It sent chills down my spine. It sounded almost exactly like that, but longer and angrier and deeper. Kind of like that sound mixed with a lion's roar. Those howls went on for so long, I'm not even sure how long it was. Probably over an hour. They'd be quiet sometimes, but then it was like this thing got mad or worked up or something, and then they'd get loud again. It sounded to both of us like there was more than one. That was another sleepless night. About 2 years after that, in September again, a hunter went missing. He wasn't a townie. I'd never met him before, and neither had any of my friends. He was missing for weeks. There was absolutely no trace of him. And trust me, enough people were looking for him. Wildlife rangers from several different areas came to look. There was a search and rescue team, volunteers, game wardens, state police. It was like this guy was a person of interest or something. I've lived in a wooded community all my life, and people get lost in the forest all the time. Usually they have a couple of game wardens and police looking, but nothing like this. I even think that the FBI got involved, but they were people that weren't talking to anybody. They just kept to themselves and were around town for a while. I felt like these people knew something that they weren't telling us. But The joke was on them, though, because everyone in this town already knew that monsters were real, and a lot of us had seen them, even though I myself hadn't actually seen one. Yet. They eventually did find that poor hunter's body, or at least that's what they told us. They wouldn't give us a cause of death. They just said it couldn't be determined. I called a bunch of bullshit on that. It's weird, but living around here and hearing so many stories for so long kind of gets you used to this kind of stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still terrified once the sun goes down, especially in those late summer months, but with the probable exception of that hunter, I don't know that they've ever actually hurt anybody, besides from the car crashes they can cause when they run across the road. I still won't sleep with my windows open, though, and even though we have a second-story home, we put the bars on Ella's windows up there. We did eventually see the Dogman, or I at least got a glimpse of him with my own eyes. What I saw was a very large wolf running away from the direction that I was facing. It was on 4 legs, but even on 4 legs, it had to be 6 feet tall. It was gray, had a long bushy tail and ears that stood straight up. It looked very well muscled, and it was very, very fast. It also made that barking noise we heard the night that it was in our shed. I saw it from the second floor bedroom window one night. It was 2 days after our neighbor's cat went missing. Once I saw it, I think I was in a bit of shock. I just went downstairs to where James was, sat next to him and took his hand. He asked what was wrong, and I told him that I'd seen it. He went to the window and looked around, but didn't see anything himself. And that was yet another sleepless night. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. And I mean, even though I was a believer, there was still part of me that was hoping that this was fake. But catching a glimpse of this thing made that hope never able to resurface again. I just had so many thoughts running through my head. How could we ever raise Ella in a place like this? And what would it take to move away from it all? What it would take is a miracle. For a lot of people, I suppose. This isn't a very wealthy town. I mean, nobody here's rich. Most people invested everything they had into their homes. I know we did. Our lives are here. Our friends are here. We're a community that cares about each other. Most people around here know each other. A lot of people grew up together. Lots of us even go to church on Sundays together. Hell, Nancy's brother-in-law is the Reverend. We have this payment on this house, and we can't just go buy another house somewhere. And I'd feel guilty as hell for selling this house to some unsuspecting person that doesn't know that there's monsters running around in the forest. So, we just follow the rules, and I guess we'll be fine. Don't go into the forest alone. At night, don't go into it at all. Keep your pets locked up tight, and don't ever shoot one. It just makes it mad. I want to thank you for taking the time to read this, and for not pushing me for more information than I was comfortable sharing. I'd also like to thank Nancy for urging me to write this out. Before we got into contact, she was one of your subscribers. Now we both are. On one hand, it's nice to know that other places and people have these same encounters. That it's not just here, that this land isn't cursed or something. But on the other hand, it's scary to think that there are more of them out there. And just how many are there? Is anywhere safe anymore? A few years ago, a dear friend of mine had the courage to tell you the horrible secret about our town. I'd like to follow in her footsteps now and share everything that's happened to our family too. Like she told you, our town has a secret that can't get out to the general public. People like you know the truth, and that's okay, but if the rest of the world, if they figured it out, I fear what the outcome would be. The two of you discussed how many encounters the people in my town have had with these creatures. You both used the term infested. I like that word too. It fits the town. Like she told you before, our town is infested with dogmen. You can refer to me as Kate for the purpose of this story, and my husband's name is Eric, since those are the names that Shelley called us during her interview. She told you about a couple of our encounters. Trust me, we have a lot more. We live pretty close to the woods, and I think that area might actually be their territory. We've seen at least 5 different individuals. We know because they all look different. I can start at the beginning of all of this, so everyone listening can hear everything that we've seen. But I want to warn you, some of it might disturb you. To start things off, we've both lived here since high school. Eric lived with his aunt and uncle after his parents passed. They've lived here all their lives. I moved here because my parents found a cheap house that they could afford and because my brother was getting into a lot of trouble in the city. I guess this was supposed to be a change of pace for all of us, especially Brad. We'd all started school a few months before I got out for the summer. Eric was only there a little over a month before we got there. But anyways, our high school was small. A lot smaller than it was in the city. I kinda liked it though because you knew most people around there. Eric and I met a few weeks after school started. We had the same algebra class and bonded over being new to town and not knowing many people. We hit it off, went on a date, and been together ever since. High school sweethearts and whatnot, except our love story involves things that an average person would probably think was a werewolf. I think most people around here know better though. There's something different. A beast all the time. But very intelligent. I think Shelley had mentioned that the first time we saw one of these things was when we were coming back from a date. We did see it that night, and we've saw it many times since then. When you're in a town like this one, people talk about the weird stuff that happens, but not with outsiders. We like to keep a lid on all the crazy shit that happens here because we don't want anyone poking around and possibly getting hurt. We learned about these things from Eric's Uncle Adam. It was after we heard them the first time. We were in Eric's room, just hanging out one night, when we heard the most unearthly screaming that you can possibly ever hear. Like you played for Shelley, I guess, you also sent me the link for a howl from an American werewolf in London. And when I played that, it was pretty damn accurate. It sounded like the screams from that werewolf in that movie. I often wonder where they got that clip from. I wonder if that was a recording from one of these actual monsters. But anyway, Eric's window is open, and it faces the woods. This thing sounded far off, but still so loud. We could hear it over the TV. So we muted it and listened for a couple of minutes before going downstairs and telling Uncle Adam and Aunt Jenny. They had just gave each other this unmistakable look, like they knew something that we didn't. The 4 of us went out onto the porch, but Uncle Adam made sure that we stayed on the porch. He didn't want us going any further out. I asked him what the hell that was, but they both kind of shrugged it off and gave us this vague wildlife answer. I wasn't convinced. It was something else. Later, Uncle Adam made sure that he was the one to drive me home, even though Eric was completely capable of doing it on his own. A couple of nights later, I was over there again, when Adam just seemed edgy and kind of guilty, I guess. He sat us down and explained everything. Aunt Jenny wasn't in the room. I don't think she wanted to talk about it or didn't want to be a part of ruining our innocence or something. But Uncle Adam admitted that he felt that we should know what was going on since we were so close to the forest. I mean, Eric lived there now and I was always over there. I guess he wanted us to just be prepared. He told us that there were these wolfmen in the forest, that's where they live. They usually stay there, but sometimes they come into town, apparently. He told us the rules that we've lived by ever since, the ones that Shelley introduced you to. You stay out of the forest at night. Don't ever go in there alone. If you hear them, stay close to the house, and stay inside if at all possible. And apparently if you shoot at them, it just pisses them off. Obviously, I didn't believe him, but time would make a believer out of me for sure. So, fast forward to September of that year. We were starting senior year of school, had heard them on more than one occasion, and were trying to just be normal kids. But to clarify things, the forest behind the house is thousands and thousands of acres of woods, national parks, waterways, you get the gist of it. It's the wilderness. It's not like his backyard was just a mile or two of trees and then like another town. So I think that the fact that we only heard these things at certain times was because they had so much land to roam. Why they like to come close to our town, though, is a mystery to me. But we heard them nonetheless. That same scary-ass scream, sometimes in different directions. It was obvious to me that there were more than one of these things because they sounded like they were communicating through the forest. I stayed skeptical, though. I didn't believe in wolfmen. It had to be something else. Probably just some normal species of wolf, and the only thing that the town was guilty of was mass hysteria. But as time went on, I did start noticing weird things around town. And one of the first strange things I noticed about it was how many animals went missing around here. I mean, it was uncanny. We're talking weekly, you'd hear about an animal going missing, or a cow or a sheep getting killed. And the place was really deserted after dark. Unless you were in the center of town, where the street lamps illuminated the area. But the back roads and the dark roads around there never had anyone on them. I'd drive them because I didn't care. Like I said, I wasn't giving in to the mass hysteria of this town and their wolfman accusations. But, like I said, soon I'd be a believer. And the thing about this place seems that there seems to be active months and dormant months with these creatures. In the hot months, they seem to vanish, maybe going further north to keep cool. And then in the cold months, you seem to see more larger animals that are getting killed or injured. Pigs and sheep and cows, a horse or two. But it seems like in the fall is when activity really spikes. If I typed out all the things I've heard in the woods or heard people say, this email would never end, but I'm still going to tell you all the good stuff. Just mind you that these stories and encounters are spread out over the course of a decade, so they didn't all happen one right after the other. Before I got a look at one myself, I heard a lot of stories. Mostly from Uncle Adam, telling us stories that he's heard in the past, or stories that he's heard people tell him around town. But also from some of those ladies in town that like to gossip. There was a man named Duncan that saw one of them in his fields, just sitting there watching his cows at dusk one night. It was that first Dogman September that I was there. When that thing realized that Duncan was watching it, it just trotted off. He was unnerved because it seemed like this thing was very intelligent. It just trotted away calmly, looked back at him, and headed into the forest. A couple of nights after that, one of our mutual friends lost her dog. She said it sounded like something was attacking him, and she never found the body. It was a smaller dog, a Jack Russell Terrier mix. It was outside for less than an hour, but I guess that was long enough for one of these things to get it. Eric's neighbor down the street swears that one of them was getting into his garbage can one night. That was the following week, after the Jack Russell went missing. He had heard lots of rustling and grunting noises, but was too afraid to go outside. I didn't blame him. I didn't want to run into any wild animal going through my garbage either, but still, I doubted that it was a wolf man. His window upstairs was open, and he was able to hear this thing moving around and making noises that he could barely even describe. And he said that there was this awful smell that wafted through his window. He described it like everybody else describes it around here. Wild animal, stale blood, stale pee. Wretched. Where his garbage cans were located, he couldn't see this creature out of his window. He tried to see, but he didn't catch a glimpse, and like I said, he wasn't going out there to see what was going on. But he did catch a glimpse of this thing, running on all four legs around the corner of his garage and back towards the forest. As September progressed, it seemed like Uncle Adam had been telling us more and more of these stories. At first I thought it was just because he was trying to prank me, as he had the entire summer, but this is when I started to be a believer myself. because soon after that there were several more animals that disappeared, especially around the area where Eric lived, and I think that's just because they were so close to the forest. Out there, a lot of people have outdoor cats that they use to keep away all the squirrels and mice and vermin and stuff. It's tragic that a lot of those cats go missing, really, but I guess that's just the way it is here, though. Things go missing all the time, and these creatures tend to get the blame for it. On several occasions that fall, we found different animals that were all chewed up in various locations around town. Usually around the forest by Eric's house, sometimes at the outskirts of town, sometimes on the roads that we used to get from Eric's house to school. There were raccoons that were just demolished. You could just find parts of them scattered around. Some local farmer had pigs that had been eaten with huge bites of flesh taken out of it and its spine bitten right through. There were a couple of deer that looked like they'd just been savaged, and all but one of them had their heads missing as well. Uncle Adam just kept reiterating to us to stay in at night and to stay out of the forest, and if we did have to go out at night, to always bring a flashlight, and it seemed to deter these creatures if you shined a flashlight in their faces. Really, I'm not sure if Eric believed them either. He thought he was just being crazy. But then the time came to make us a believer. Finally. I know I've said it a lot in this email, but this was the part where I actually started believing wholeheartedly that these things exist. And ironically, it was actually the night that we ended up losing our virginities to each other. It was like a cruel joke given to us by fate to have something so wonderful happen, followed by something so awful on the same night. Adam and Jenny were out of town for the weekend, and we decided it was a perfect time to explore the birds and the bees. So, as he was driving me home that night, we saw one of these things run across the road. Let me tell you, everything that you think you know about these creatures, everything you think you know about the world and how it works, just vanishes in a split second when you see one of these things. The reason I know it wasn't just some wolf or bear was because this thing was running on 2 legs, and none of those other creatures do that. It darted in front of us on the road, maybe 200 feet in front of us, but since it was nighttime and the high beams were on, we got a really good look at this creature. It was so tall that it had to tower over the tallest man in the world. It was muscular, and even under the hair, you could see those muscles. It was a dark gray color, but it had other colors mixed in its coat, like tans and blacks and browns. It was shaggier on its shoulders and neck. It almost looked like a lion's mane. It ran on its toes like a dog does, but it swung its arms like a man does. It didn't look at us, and I didn't get the feeling of evil like a lot of these encounters say, but I sure as hell got an extreme feeling of fear, like my entire world had just been turned upside down, that I would never be completely safe again because there's these creatures out there that could just destroy you in a second. Those claws on those hands were just massive, and I'm sure could shred anything, any type of flesh that it got its hands on. We both screamed. I'm not gonna lie. It terrified the shit out of both of us. Eric just kept driving past this thing as it ran from one side of the forest into the other. It didn't try to stop and attack us or even look at us, and it just kept going. I think maybe it was caught off guard too. But anyways, Eric just sped up and kept going as we were both yelling, just out loud and to each other, trying to figure out what the hell that thing was and admitting that those things were real. It seemed that after we finally calmed down, that Uncle Adam was right. The entire time, everything he told us was absolutely true. There were wolfmen in the forest. Holy shit. For weeks, we would just talk about that thing. I was traumatized. I didn't want to go over to his house. He would come over to mine and spend the night because he didn't want to be there either. He wanted to comfort me and he wanted to hang out, but I think, honestly, he didn't want to be by the forest either. He'd sleep on the couch in the living room, and we just told my parents that he was upset with his aunt and uncle. Luckily, my parents were pretty cool and let him crash there, as long as he stayed on the couch for the night. But Eventually, he went home and I started going back over there too. He was my guy. I loved him. I wasn't going to leave him because some monster was in the forest. I figured as long as we followed those rules that Uncle Adam told us about, we'd be fine. But now, we definitely knew that those things were out there. And when we told Adam and Jenny, they just started sharing stories of how they saw it too. Since then, we've seen these things over a dozen times, and even though we're used to seeing them, having another encounter with these things doesn't get any less terrifying. Adam and Jenny have both passed since then. They were old back then, things happen. Luckily, they were both very old when they died, and it was all natural causes, but they weren't really around anymore to share these experiences with. They were there for some of them, but I just want to let you know that all the rest of these encounters are in no particular order. I'm just writing them down as I think about them. One time we were driving home late at night, which, honestly, that's something that can't always be avoided. We saw one of these things, standing in the tree line, just staring at us as we drove by. I think, just like the first one that we saw on the road, it was just as taken aback as we were. It was just standing there, and when it saw us, it just kind of retreated, walking backwards back into the forest, trying to get out of sight. That one was a different color than the one we saw the first time. It looked almost jet black. Not as tall, but just as muscular. Neither of these times, though, did I ever seem like they wanted to hurt us. I felt like they mostly just wanted to get out of the way, I think. We've heard the sounds of some poor animals being ripped apart by them in the middle of the night several times. Usually that happens in the forest. Death cries and screaming and something that's just terrifying, like it was dying, and then these excited yipping and screaming and barking noises. Honestly, it sounds like several of them found some poor deer and attacked it and started eating it while it was still alive. It's really crazy to think that these things might be pack hunters. We've gone out into the forest because we're not letting something like this determine how we live. We always just stay together or in big groups when we're in the forest. We never go in there at night, it's always during the day. There's a lot of people that still go out into the forest because, as scary as these things are, being in the woods is a way of life for a lot of people out here. But we've found more carcasses that are chewed up than I can count, or even want to remember. Usually it seems like it's a deer, but there's other times that it's raccoons or foxes, animals that might be from town. We've heard deep growling noises as we've walked to our car at night. I know it's not a dog or a wolf or a bear. It's something bigger than any of those creatures, and the growls sound angry and intimidating. One of our more in-depth encounters happened one night while I was asleep, and Eric woke me up, saying that one of them was outside. We could actually see this thing roaming on our property. It was staying out of the lights, but we still got a good glimpse of this thing. It was moving around on all fours, not running, but walking pretty quickly, sniffing around here and there like it was looking for something. It went up to the garbage cans, sniffed around there like it wasn't interested, and moved on. This one was larger than the gray one that we saw. Larger than the black one for sure, but it was almost the same color as that first gray one. I had the distinct feeling, though, that this was not the same gray creature that we saw a few years prior to that. It would stop and look around almost like it was trying to make sure that nobody was watching it. I don't know if it knew we were watching it, though, because there were only slits in the curtains above it as we peered out. Our dog, though, was very whiny, panting, trying to scratch at the door. Luckily, though, he sleeps in the room with us and our door shut, so he wasn't able to go out there and make a fool of himself and get killed by this thing. I don't know if that dogman knew that our dog was there, but obviously these things have exceptional hearing, in my opinion, and our dog acting like this was just not piquing this thing's interest. It was very interested in something in the backyard. And then it dawned on me. Our cat, Tinkerbell, had died about a week before that, and we buried her in the backyard. She was old, and it was a euthanasia. It wasn't like the dogman got her, and we decided to just bury her in the backyard where she could be with other animals that have passed away through the years. I think he could smell Tinkerbell's corpse and was trying to find it. We must have watched this thing prowl around our backyard for 10 minutes, maybe even more. And then I saw the area where we had buried Tinkerbell was already disturbed. I think he'd already dug her up. That was just sad to me, that my poor cat had been dug up and probably eaten and scavenged by this thing. After that, it still prowled around. What it was looking for, I have no idea. But it would make these excited yipping noises, like a hyena almost. And that was one of the times I was the most scared after witnessing these creatures, because I thought if it was right there, what was to stop it from breaking in? Especially with the dog going crazy like he was. Eventually, this thing either figured out we were watching it or decided to let us know that he'd been aware of us the whole time. Because in this one fluid moment, he spun around, stood up on two legs, and then looked straight at our window. You could tell just how large this thing was. I'm thinking it was 8 feet tall. When it stood up, it let out this horrible screaming noise that we've heard so many times before, although this time it was almost deafening because it was so close. I mean, you could hear it clear as day, even through the window. I have no idea how long it stood there staring at the window, because as soon as it looked up and spun around, we spun away from the window and pressed our backs against the walls, almost hyperventilating. The dog was going absolutely insane at this point, but eventually he stopped whining, and I think this thing ended up leaving. Like I said, I can't tell for sure. I wasn't looking out there again. I wasn't trying to offer this werewolf-looking monster that there were some tasty morsels inside and all he had to do was break down the front door to come get us. I spent the entire next day not wanting to go outside at all, but eventually Eric convinced me that this was no way to live. Another time we know for certain that this thing was on our property was a few years after that. Our same dog was going apeshit crazy. Not like the last time, but aggressive. And we knew that based off of his reaction, that thing was back. Only this time it was earlier in the night and we were both awake. We were sitting in the living room watching a movie when the dog started going nuts and pawing at the front door. We paused the movie to turn the lights down and listen for this creature, but we didn't hear those screams again. All we heard was something extremely heavy walking around on the wooden porch out front. It would walk one way to the end of the house, turn around, and walk all the way back again. It seemed like it was searching for something again, although there weren't any fresh animal corpses for it to dig up this time. Luckily, we'd gotten accustomed to keeping our firearms around us, even knowing that it might not kill this thing, but according to Adam, it could have just scared it away. It was a comforting fact, even if it was a bunch of bullshit. We stood there in the middle of the living room, back to back, just listening to this thing pace back and forth. It was too heavy to be a person, but it damn sure sounded like it was walking around on two legs. Throw in the fact that the dog was reacting like that, we knew that that thing was walking around outside again. Eventually it wandered off, and we sure as hell didn't go out that night to investigate, but the next morning we did. And there wasn't anything out of the ordinary except a strong smell of urine coming from somewhere around the house. We've seen things run across the road on more than one occasion. Each time, though, you could tell that they were different because they all had different colorations or markings. And one time, we even saw a smaller one running across the road. I think this one might have been a juvenile, based off of how small it was. I say small like it's a relative term because even as small as this thing was compared to the other ones that we saw, it was still just as large as Eric, maybe even bigger. The incident that Shelley had told you about, where we saw one of these creatures walking across the road, was when it was carrying what I'm pretty sure was a dead raccoon in its hand. I don't know if he killed the raccoon or if he was scavenging it like Tinkerbell, but these things do tend to get hit on the roads a lot, and they end up on the sides of the roads dead all the time, so It was possible, I guess, that it had found the raccoon dead on the side of the road and scavenged it. But it was clearly holding on to something the way that a human would hold on to something. Usually, if you're looking at a canine or a feline or a bear or something like that that was carrying a corpse of an animal, then it would be in its mouth, but this thing was either intelligent enough or at least capable enough to be able to run on two legs and carry something in its hands. From what I could tell, based off of my encounters, these things do have opposable thumbs, as I have determined, based off of the fact that they can jiggle the handles on your doors. This one that we saw running across the road with the raccoon was a bigger one. 7 feet tall, maybe more. It had that same muscular yet sleek body condition. Brown fur all over its body, but a shaggy mane type style on the back of its neck like the one we saw before that. That mane was darker brown or black. The arms of these things are unnaturally long. This one wasn't any different. It sort of bends over or slouches when it runs, but seems completely natural when it's on two legs. We described this one like the one that looked like the werewolf from Van Helsing. Very wolf-like head and face. This one, when it ran across the road, was very close to our house, so we spent another night awake with our guns in our hands. Yet again, though, they never seem to break into the house, although I'm 100% certain that they are powerful enough to. Sometimes, when you go out into the forest, you see these claw marks high up in trees where I don't think anything else can reach. And when Uncle Adam was alive, he told us that he thinks they were the marks that these things made to signify its territory, and it was their way of letting other dogmen know where their territory ended and began. There's been several times where we would be sitting there, either watching a movie or reading or having dinner, and you could hear the doorknobs actually jiggle, and there's something walking around on the patio again. There's been several times where you can hear something large walking around on your roof. How these things even get up there is beyond me. Maybe they can jump up that high. Who the hell knows? There's no claw marks on the sides of the walls leading up to the roof, so it's not like they're digging their claws into the walls to climb up. I just think that maybe they go up there to get a better look of the land. But who the hell knows? I'm not going to go out there and ask them. There's been so many times in the mornings where we've gone outside and found big wolf-like or dog-like prints in the yard, circling the house, leading from the forest and back to the forest. You can find prints like that in the forest sometimes too. We have all kinds of pictures of them, of course, but I'm not really interested in sharing them with anybody because, once again, I would like to remind you that I don't want anybody coming to our town and snooping around. We think one time a hunter was doing that and got too close to the dogman's territory. He was never seen again. I believe Shelley had talked about that in the depths of her conversation. The scarier portions, though, are when you catch one of them peering into your window. Usually it's late at night when everything is quiet and the lights are off. I believe these things have exceptional sight in the dark, and I think that's why they can peer into your windows at night, trying to see what's going on in there. You always make sure that you keep your blinds shut and your curtains closed tight around here. You don't want to give them any room to look through them and peer into your house, but like I said, every once in a while, shit happens. Sometimes the air conditioning kicks on and the curtains blow, or you just don't shut them tightly enough and you see a giant wolf face looking at you through the window. For some reason, these things don't like to break in. They should have all the power in the world to come after you, which, after living here so long, is kind of a comfort, I guess, knowing that you're safe inside. But even so, seeing them peering through your window is probably one of the scariest things that you can ever imagine. I remember the first time I saw one of these things looking in the window as I was walking from the kitchen back into the living room. I was on my way back to the bedroom upstairs and had to pass through, and I caught a glimpse of something moving through the window. It was just enough to catch my attention, but still so slight. When I looked, I saw this head bobbing back and forth, looking in, and when I noticed it and realized that it was a wolf, I screamed. This thing pulled away quickly and disappeared. I still ran upstairs screaming, calling for Eric and telling him that one of those things was back. We spent the rest of the night up, not sleeping, looking out through the windows once again. But I think once these things realize that they're caught or noticed, they tend to disappear to avoid some type of altercation. Although, I really don't think they have anything to fear from us. I've had all kinds of neighbors and friends in town tell me stories about these things being seen in one of our neighbors' yards. One of them killed my friend's chickens, every single one of them, ripped the door completely off of the hinges in the coop. We've had friends tell us that they too have seen these things peering into their windows, or even licking the glass as it watched them inside. Lots of people get good looks at these things, and when I talk to them and ask them to describe their size and coloration, a lot of them tend to vary. Sometimes they're described as tan or brown or black or gray. Sometimes those colors mix together. Some people describe them as 8-foot tall giants. Some of them describe them as 6 feet tall. Some are big and muscular. Some are more sleek and slender. I really think that there's a lot of them out in those woods. Maybe even a colony or a pack. And I honestly don't understand why they're out there. I just think it has to do with how much forest is there and how much territory that they can claim. One of my friends in town said they heard it walking around on his roof one night, something big and heavy, as his dog was going just as crazy as our dog did. I'm trying to get another friend to email you about the encounters that he had. 2 very scary encounters. Scarier than anything that I witnessed. There was one in his backyard that he ended up chasing off, and it destroyed his fence on the way out. Another time he saw 2 of these things on the road at the same time. I won't get into all of his details because I'm really pushing for him to contact you, so the long and short of it is one night his dog was going crazy. He went outside with his rifle, saw one of these things come up to him, and he shot at it. Then the other time, these things were on the road and ended up trying to get him to crash or something because he thought that they saw him as a food source. Both times he escaped with his life and didn't get any injuries, but I can just imagine how terrifying it would have been to be face to face with one of these creatures without anything protecting you, like your home or being inside your vehicle. Hopefully, he'll have enough nerve to contact you too. I had another friend that let his dog go out to the bathroom and it was seemingly attacked by one of these creatures in the minutes that it was outside. It was this big lab pit mix, and I guess by some grace of God it was able to either fight this creature off or at least scared this creature enough to survive. I mean, he did suffer some lacerations that had to be surgically repaired by a vet, and he had like stitches and stuff, but at least he walked away with his life. And like I said, you kind of learn to live with these creatures. They're not going to go anywhere, and we have everything invested in this town. We've been here for so long now that I think we're kind of numb to the things that happen around here. But I won't be a prisoner in my own home. Of course, when we go out at night, we're armed, and although according to my friend that had an encounter with the rifle shooting portion of that story, it isn't really going to do anything besides maybe scare it off if you're lucky, but it definitely won't kill it. Like one of Shelley's friends that was out hunting and actually confirmed that he shot that thing. It just stood there without batting an eye and still chased him and his son out of the forest. I'm sure there's more encounters that I've heard over the years, but really a lot of them are the same. Some of them walking around on someone's property or looking in windows, running across the road or snatching a pet. They really are a menace here, but with neighbors and townspeople as careful as us, not a lot of people get hurt. I think we all just play it safe, and even the ones that live in town that don't believe, at least humor the ones that do. Because even though they can't explain what's going on, they know that something out there isn't right. Maybe they have other explanations, but they still play it safe. Not a lot of people even hunt in our area, even though they want to. This is a hunting community. Everybody here has either hunted or hiked or gone on extended camping trips. This is a mountain town. I mean, Eric's best friend Eddie drives over an hour to go hunting when he has a perfectly fine population of deer and elk right here. But Among the other rules that we try to live by is the fact that if you kill an animal in their territory, they pretty much think that they have the right to come and take it. I've heard a couple of stories where people have gone hunting and have bagged a deer only for one of these things to either appear or at least make sounds that scare the people enough to run away and leave their kill there for these things to just take and eat. That's not something that anyone around here is willing to do. I mean, walking through the forest with a group of friends in the daytime is one thing, but tempting them with a warm kill and fresh meat is just plain dumb. Honestly, as I close this, I feel like I should have a closing statement or something since this email is so long. Laugh out loud, but other than everything I told you and how scary these creatures can be, I don't think there's much else I can say. For now, until the next encounter happens, right? I'm sure I'll see these creatures again and I'll email you about it. I guess just stay safe out there in the forest if you feel like you need to be out there. I'm sure these creatures aren't just in our area, especially with how much forest connects us with other states. I'm sure these things can just wander around, and if they're anything like a regular wolf, they can travel miles and miles and miles in just a day's time. So who knows where these things can actually end up if they feel like migrating. I saw that picture of the creature outside of that zoo in Texas, and it just sent chills down my spine because that silhouette just looked a lot like the things that we've seen around here. So I guess as I close this email, I just want to say thank you, and for all the people out there that think that they want to see one of these things, just take my advice and listen to my opinion. You're better off not seeing these things. You're better off living in ignorance and bliss, because when you do see one of these creatures, it's going to change your perspective on everything that this world has to offer. So again, I say just stay safe out there. I guess the new thing to do among my group of friends is to contact you and tell you about all the times we've come face to face with monsters in our town. I'm doing this against my better judgment, but I guess if you promise to keep my name and the town anonymous, then there's no harm in telling you what we've seen, right? What we've seen is a creature called the Dogman, although they look incredibly similar to a Hollywood werewolf. I'm sure if these creatures are real, then werewolves might be too, but I don't think these creatures are man that sometimes turns into an animal under the light of the full moon. I think these things are from somewhere else, and they've just been stranded here. I heard once, with one of those missing 411 things, that they might have the power to open up the veil between this world and their world, or that they somehow get plucked from their existence and put into ours. I'm not sure which one of those is true, but I think that they started out somewhere else, not in this world, or dimension, or whatever. I think now that they're here, though, that's something that eventually is going to come out, and everybody in the world is going to be faced with an ugly truth that monsters really are real. With that being said, I will tell you about my encounters and share some encounters that I've heard from other people. We have a lot of these creatures around this area, and in these parts, a lot of people know that they're out there, but we keep it to ourselves. I've seen these things numerous times that are scarier than the rest. Neither of these encounters were the first time I experienced these things in town. I've seen them around here quite a few times before, actually, and then I've had an up-close and personal experience with them now, and I'll never look at the world the same. They seem to like to stick to the shadows and keep out of human eyesight, but when they're coming into town, it makes that kind of hard to avoid all the time. For a while, I thought these things were either stalking me or caught my scent, hunting me, because of these two encounters that I had. They're pretty close in the timeline of me experiencing them, but since I haven't really come face to face with them in several years now, I'm starting to think that it was just a coincidence that I had back-to-back encounters with these things. Or at least, that's what I like to tell myself. Maybe after this second encounter, these things just had enough of me and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Who knows?
Some things that you should know about me, just to set the story, is that I'm happily married to my lady love. We've been married for 36 years this coming up December. We have 3 boys, all of which are grown now, but during these encounters, my eldest was in high school, and the other 2 were in middle school. They're tough boys, just how I raised them. But seeing these things at our home was terrifying to me, because even as tough as I raised my boys, and them knowing how to hunt and be outdoorsmen, they wouldn't stand a chance against these creatures. I don't scare easily. I ran towards this thing when I encountered it at my home. I didn't have any regard for my own life. I just wanted it to get away from my family. But with that being said, even though I don't scare easily, I wasn't only terrified that this creature would harm my family, but I was also terrified just coming face to face with it and looking it in the eyes. Because in those eyes, I saw pure evil, something that I'd never experienced before in my entire life. The first encounter that caused major concern for me when I was driving down the road towards my home. I was on call that week for my job, which I won't tell you exactly what I do, but I do work for the county. So it was my job to keep my phone on at all hours for that weekend, to go out if I was needed to respond to a call. It was after 2 in the morning when I was on my way home. I received a call and I went out there because of some flooding. I finished my job and I decided, hell, why not try to get a couple of hours of sleep before I get another call? Usually around here, the roads are dead after dusk. After that night, it had been storming pretty bad, so the roads were wet and slick too. So this was just another typical night where nobody was around. And since my house is not exactly in town, there's a long stretch of road that's through the middle of a part of the forest where trees are thick on both sides. It's one of those roads where there's a deer crossing sign all over the place because they have a habit of running out in front of you. They make you crash your car sometimes. It's one of those mountain roads. Maybe that's where this thing got the idea to do this. It saw a deer run out one time and cause a car to crash, and it was smart enough to remember how to do that and teach the other ones how to do the same thing. Anyways, as I was driving down the street, I caught a glimpse of what I thought initially was a man standing on the side of the road. And I thought to myself, you crazy son of a bitch, what are you doing out here this late at night? As I got closer though, I realized exactly what I was looking at. It was one of them. But this one was much smaller than any of the other ones that I've seen or heard about. This one couldn't have been any taller than myself. Passing by this thing was captivating and terrifying. I heard all the stories. I've seen them myself. I knew what they were capable of, although I hadn't had any dangerous run-ins with one of these myself. But just when I thought I was going to drive by this thing without any problem is when another one ran right in front of me. We're talking just a couple of feet in front of my car, but fast as hell. It caused me to swerve and almost lose control of my car because the ground was still so slick. The other one was just standing still, watching me intently. I think it was watching, making sure if I did crash, it would be able to take me out quickly. I know a lot of what I'm saying sounds like conspiracies, but it's just the stuff that goes through my mind, so bear with me. I think it's a hunting tactic for them, to be honest. I think when they run in front of a car, they're intelligent enough to know that it might crash, and there are people inside. I've read a lot about lions in Africa that when they get too old, they start hunting people because they're easier targets. And that's what I think was going on here. I think that one of these was either old or injured and was using the other one to cooperate in a coordinated attack to make me crash my car and possibly have me for dinner. Luckily though, I did not lose control. I merely swerved back and forth into the other lane and then back into my own. And then both of them just stood there behind me. I could see them in my rear view. The red glow of my taillights illuminating them in a horror movie style that made me damn near crap my own self. They didn't give chase. Like I said, I think one of them was either old or injured, and they were resorting to people as a food source. I didn't get a very good look at either of them because everything happened so quickly. But I do know that as short as the first one was, it still seemed extremely muscular, and it was jet black in color. It had your stereotypical wolf head and a shaggy body like all of them do. I was so focused on the first one that I didn't really see the second one until everything happened. and although it seemed bigger, as in taller and more muscular, I can't say for certain. I think it reflected a lighter brown color, but it could have been dark tan. I'm not really sure. I know that it was taller than my car. I know that it was fast as hell. But that's about the only description I have for you for the second one. And this was only about 1.5 miles from my home. So I sped up, got home, locked the doors, woke my wife and told her what happened, and spent the rest of the night in an uncomfortable sleep where I would dream of these creatures. And every so often, I would wake up, look out the window, and go check on my boys to make sure that they were all okay. Then I'd lie back in bed and think about what I had just encountered. It was only 9 days later that I had my second encounter with these creatures, up close and personal. Even closer than the last one. To this day, I still believe that they might have caught my scent, or they saw me as prey and wanted to come after me. But I think, with my reactions, the one that was wounded, or old, that saw me as a food source, decided I wasn't worth the effort after all. The next terrifying thing that happened to me was one night when our dog Camo was acting strange. He's a hunting dog, and he's very well trained. He knows to listen to his commands the first time he's told, and we don't usually have to tell him more than once to do something. But this night, he was restless and whiny and pacing back and forth. He was hopping up on the couch and pawing at us and just acting very unusual. We were telling him to settle down, as he'd already went outside and already had his dinner, but for some reason, he wouldn't listen to us. And when he went from being restless and whiny to defensive and the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up, I knew something was wrong. He'd run to the door that led to our backyard, which butted up against some forested area, which after that was a river, and he would pause at the door and then start growling. Then he would run off to the kitchen, which was facing the same area as the backyard and the other side of our house, and he would bark towards the corner and run down the kitchen back towards the back door, barking and growling all the while. Then I heard something big walking around out there on our patio, which basically just consisted of a bunch of wooden slats and some stairs that were also made out of wood that connected our patio to the lawn. And for some reason, I just got very unnerved at this situation. It was like the survivalist in me knew that something was strange and I needed to address it. But then Camo started going from defensive to downright aggressive. He was barking and barking at the door in such a defensive manner that my mind immediately went to those things that I saw running across the street. Like I said, everybody here knows that these things exist. I told my boys from a young age that they exist, but that you never really consider the fact that one of them is going to come up on your property until it actually happens to you. Part of me thought, or at least hoped, that it was one of those people that had been just kind of wandering around town. Maybe they were trying to break in and do something to us, even though I didn't know anybody in the area that was crazy enough to do that. Every once in a while, you get one of those drifters that are around here, just passing through town, and usually with guys like me and my friends, we kindly suggest that they move on. Little do they know that we're actually doing them a favor, because if they ended up in the forest, they would wind up as one of these things' meals. I knew better than that, though. There was part of me that just knew that one of those things was out there. I was sure of it. I kept thinking that it caught my scent during the last encounter with them. I got the rifle out of my closet and went outside to kind of investigate what was going on, and I was hit with this putrid smell. I've been out in the woods my whole life. My grandpa taught my dad how to hunt. He passed that on to me, and then I passed that knowledge on to my boys. Being out in the wilderness is second nature to me, and I'm familiar with different smells of rot and decay in wild animal, but this was something that I never smelled before. But unfortunately, I have smelled it since then. So me and Camo go out there, and he's just beside himself going crazy. I had him on a leash just to be safe, but he broke off the leash and ran around the corner as I started yelling at him to come back. He barked and barked his head off, and then all of a sudden, I hear this screech from around the corner that I've heard in the past, but not so up close. This time, it was so close I could feel it in my chest. And all of a sudden, Camo runs around the corner again, the fear of God in his eyes, running like a bat out of hell, not wanting any part of whatever the hell it was that was around the corner. And then all of a sudden, this thing just appears from around the corner. But it wasn't on 4 legs, it was on 2. At first, it kind of looked around the corner in a peeking action. And then it just stepped into the light. And I've never seen anything so terrifying, so up close and personal. It was like one of those scenes in a movie where you see it walk in and they finally reveal the monster on camera. And the camera just kind of pans from its feet all the way up to its face, so you know exactly how big this creature is. Believe me, that's exactly how I felt, because this thing absolutely towered over me. I'm not the tallest man in the world. Hell, I barely break 6 feet tall in shoes, but this thing had a good 2 feet on me. It stopped in its tracks, but looked at me with this menacingly horrid stare. I've never seen anything stare at you like that. It was just this instant feeling of terror. I knew that I'd messed up going outside, but still, I also knew it was my responsibility to protect my family, and I would absolutely die for them. At this point, I'm maybe 30 or 40 feet away from this thing, and trembling like I've never trembled in my entire life. It was like a mix of terror and adrenaline, and I knew that I had to respond to it. It didn't move any closer. It just growled this deep, guttural, insanely loud growl. I felt like it was challenging me at that point. Like it was saying, I dare you to react, because if you do, I'm going to tear you apart. And living in this place as long as I have, I've heard the theory that if you shoot these things, it would just piss them off. But I also live in the real world. Bullets kill things. Still, being face to face with one of these creatures, I realize now why people thought that that was true. Because this thing was pure muscle. And it looked like you'd need a tank to destroy one. So I compromised. I raised my rifle up in the air and I shot into the sky. Even as big and menacing as this thing is, it had to be afraid of the sound of a rifle, right? It did take a step back, but just one single step. And that's when I thought, to hell with it. I'm either going to kill this thing or piss it off. But either way, I'm taking my shot, and I'm defending myself and my family and our home. So I aimed the rifle, cold dead at this thing. And it looked at me and tilted its head. It looked at the gun and snarled. I was so dumbfounded by the fact that this thing could actually recognize a firearm that I hesitated taking the shot. It looked back up into my eyes, and I swear to you, at that point I felt my soul leave my body. It snarled again, but started backing away just a couple of feet, which dwarfed my own steps in comparison. And then it turned around and sprinted on 2 legs, faster than anything I've ever seen in my entire life. Even when that thing ran across the street that night, it seemed still faster. I jogged after it, trying to get a good shot, and I took it. I don't think I hit it, but I think I at least caught it off guard because I was standing my ground. It seemed to stumble as it ran, and when it went to leap over my fence, which is 7 feet tall, one of the feet caught the tip of one of the fence posts. What resulted, though, was 6 of those fence posts being broken in half just by one leg of this creature hitting it. It broke them in half and ripped the nails from the rest of the fence, causing a giant hole in the fence, like it ran right through it. I ran towards it still, making sure that I was off my property, hollering and yelling, trying to be as big and as intimidating as possible. I doubt that I intimidated this thing though, but at least I caught it off guard enough to chase it off of my property. I ran back into the house, locked all the doors, told the wife and kids to stay inside, and under no circumstances were they to leave, and then I proceeded to tell them what I found and what I did. Trust me, none of them left the house that night, and none of them left the house at night for a solid month. And even then, anytime we had to leave when the moon was up and the sun was down, there were some major anxiety issues. Like my friends that have contacted you before me, have all told you that we're always hearing about animals either being attacked or going missing around here, or these things walking around on your rooftops for some reason. I know for a fact that those things happen too, because I've heard other people tell me about it. It's not like any of us live close enough to each other where these things can jump from rooftop to rooftop as a means of getting around, so I'd like to understand why these creatures have a knack for climbing on your roof. Maybe it's just to scare the hell out of you. Maybe it's so if you go outside to investigate, they have the advantage of being up top, and they can drop down and ambush you. When you have them running around through the forest making those horrible barking noises or those screaming sounds, it's one thing. But then if you have them on your rooftops or peering into your windows, that's terrifying. I've never noticed any of them looking through my windows, but I guess that doesn't mean they haven't. Because as big as these things are, they're stealthy as hell. I'm sure they could sneak right up on you and devour you in a second if they wanted to. And if it wasn't for my dog telling me that one was outside, I might have never known. I've had several friends whose dogs have been outside and got into some kind of a commotion. Luckily, some of them have made it back, although with some, unfortunately, they haven't. Then, of course, you have the other ones that like to run across the road to try to get you to crash your car, like it did to me. I also know of another town that's connected to us through our forest that has their fair share of troubles with these creatures, and I'm sure that these animals or beasts or whatever you want to call them use the forest as a way to travel to other places. A good friend of ours who's actually been friends with my wife since high school lives in that town, and she was looking out her window one night from her second story and saw something large in one of her oak trees, and as she gazed at this thing, she realized the sheer bulk of this creature that was up in her tree. And even as big as this thing was, it was graceful enough to be perched up in this tree. She said it would go back and forth from looking down at the ground up to where she was gazing at it, like it was trying to get the bird's eye view of something. And she realized exactly what she was looking at. One of those dogmen. But just like the one that I saw on the outside of the road, she feels this one might have been a juvenile because she's heard stories about how big these things could get, and at first she thought it was just a man up in her tree because it wasn't that big. The way it stood there, gripping the tree with one arm and one hand, and its legs basically wrapped around the trunk, she said there was just something about its posture that gave it this defined amount of intelligence. She thinks they might even have problem-solving intelligence, because she's also heard stories in her town about these things rattling doors or getting food out of traps that have been set without setting off the trap. I also want to touch base with you on that story that Shelley told you about, where the hunter went missing. You see, I was part of one of the groups that went looking for that poor guy, right after he was reported missing. One of the first people out there, and I was trying to find him, thinking, or at least hoping, that he'd just gotten lost in the forest. But, in reality, when you know as much as I do, you know that he was probably a goner. But I went out there and did my due diligence anyway, trying to find this guy, but then after a day or two of looking for him, just me and the sheriff, some other locals that had volunteered, and a couple of park rangers in a nearby area, we started getting all these other people coming. People with tinted out windows. People that didn't talk to you. People that would tell you that they could take it from here, and that we should go back home and be with our families. You know the ones. Government type officials. I believe they knew more than they were letting on. I think they knew more than even we did, even though we're the ones that have been living with these creatures for so long. Like Shelley said, they did eventually find the guy, or that's what they claimed, but he'd been dead for a long time. Rumor has it from a very good friend of mine that works with the sheriff that they didn't find much of him at all. Dental records and that kind of stuff. I'm sure you understand. That's what they used to confirm that the body that they found was indeed that guy that was missing. But even still, these creatures, they don't seem to attack people much. It's mostly the wildlife or your pets, which, as crappy as it sounds, I'm kind of thankful for, though. I'd rather have animals go missing than somebody's son or daughter or mother or father. I had a friend tell me about an encounter one time where the same thing happened to him that happened to me, where it ran across the road, but He wasn't as fortunate enough to keep control of his vehicle and ended up crashing into a tree. Luckily, though, he wasn't hurt, but he did have some officials come out and give him a field sobriety test. Needless to say, he passed them all with flying colors. This man that I knew didn't drink at all, let alone drink behind the wheel, but he swore that it was one of those things that caused the wreck. And as much as I believe him, I think there's still some people that don't entirely believe about what we talk about, or about what's to come in this town. There's certain people that think it's taboo to even talk about it still. I mean, I don't truly blame them. I think a lot of people are skeptical to keep their minds safe from accepting what we already know. If you change your mind about the way the world works and what's really out there, then you'll never be able to look at the world the same way again. I feel that that loss of innocence is something that not everybody needs to experience, but unfortunately it's something that I'm all too familiar with. There's certain people here that don't have a problem talking about it, but we still talk in whispers and hushed conversations. I think we don't want anybody else to know, and I think we want to keep it that way. And still, a lot of us are hoping to lead normal lives and respect those creatures in the forest, and hope that they don't end up walking around your property in the middle of the night. I know they did that to mine, and I know that I was fortunate enough to drive it away. I really do think the one that I saw run across the road that night was the same one that I saw on my property 9 nights later. And even though I have my theories about why, I can't verify that it was sick or old. I just really feel like it lost its ability to hunt, and like those lions in Savo that I read about one time, they developed a taste for human flesh. It wasn't too long after I had my encounter that that poor hunter went missing. It was actually just a couple of months, so maybe the one that paid me a visit got a hold of him. Anyways, I feel I've gone on long enough now, and if I went on any more, I'd probably say some stuff that I shouldn't share. I do want to thank you for being kind enough to share our secret, yet still keeping it a secret from everybody where we're located. Like I said, 1, we don't want people coming around here and poking their noses around our town, because we want to just lead peaceful lives. But 2, we also don't want anybody getting hurt, and if they went by the way the hunter did, then there would be a lot of blood on our hands if we let the location of this place out and people came searching for proof. Like my good friend Shelley said, this didn't happen in Mississippi. You have 49 other states to consider. But as far as I'm concerned, I'll never tell you exactly where this is located. Have a nice night, and stay safe out there.